This is just a little bit of memorabilia that someone made. Someone made this shadow box for me here. It has, let's see, it's got Charlotte, my wife, and I years ago. This is our family. With our 5 children. The oldest is Rulinda, which is over here, and Charlotte, my wife here. Trace, next one. He owns car washes and apartments and so on. They all have real estate interests. There's Scott, he's the mission president in Brazil right now. Daniel, he's the youngest. He runs our storage unit projects along the Wasatch Front. I don't know, we have, 6,000 or 8,000 units now. And Daniel runs all those $2 bills. We give away a lot of $2 bills. We just kind of let that be a gift that we give to kids and people that are special to us. Anyway, these are some of our agents up here. We've had, I don't know, we probably had in 55 years that I've been in business, we probably had, I don't know, 500 agents that has worked for us over the years. This is, these are my boys when they were young. When they turned 18, they all got their license. They all had real estate licenses, and Trace has a contractor's license also. They all have stayed kind of in the real estate family, and they all. Daniel's still practicing. Shanna's not here. Shanna's right over here. That little one right there. Anyway, our family have all stayed in real estate pretty much, and they all own real estate and rental units, and they help us with our subdivisions and whatever. Anyway, we're kind of a real estate family, is what we are, and they all know it better than I do. Anyway.
Do they all enjoy it, Jack?
Well, they enjoy the checks. I don't know that they all enjoy doing the selling. Shanna's a good salesperson. She's still the only one that's active there. Daniel's still active in it. He's doing more commercial stuff and helps us with our subdivisions and our land development. And as I say, he's the one that's building the storage complexes. We have them all along the Wasatch Front. We got them in Ogden, North Ogden, Layton, and Bountiful, and just built 2 new ones in Farmington, Draper. Anyway, Daniel handles all those, and he runs those and does a real good job of it. They're all real estate minded, and we've enjoyed the fruits of it over the years. I don't know what else to say. I feel like I'm sitting here bragging on.
Well, brag on your kids, Jack. It's okay. Tell us how much you love them.
I do love them. I do love them all. They don't always agree 100%, but when we come to family meetings, why, it's kind of a shouting match sometimes, and but we all leave loving each other and agreeing with usually what decisions we make as a family. And they all are smart. They're all. We don't have any drones. They all work. They all have their jobs. They have their own private businesses that are associated in one way or another with our business, and we're happy for each other when each of us are to what some degree, a little bit successful here and there. We're happy for that, and when we have tough times, we've had tough times together, and we hurt together too, and so we're lucky we got a good family. So we're very blessed. Heavenly Father's been really good to us.
Did Charlotte do any selling, or did she do anything in the business?
She just took care of kids, raised family, and straightened me out when I'd get off track and tell me I need to do more time with the family and not so much with business. And she was always right. I'll tell you about, I'm going to tell you about one thing that just popped into my mind. When
Wait for a second until you get back on the camera.
yeah, we just put it up there. This is a little story I was just telling my secretary this morning. Years ago, when I was called to be a bishop by President Kimball, who later became the president of the church while I was a bishop, and he ordained me. He ordained me to the office of bishop, and so I always had a lot of love for him. And he was related to my family. He's through the Woolley family. He and my dad are cousins. His mother and my dad's mother were half sisters. And any rate, when he was president of the church, he came out back maybe 1974 or sometime along in there. He said, everybody should raise a garden. And he admonishing the members of the church to be self-sustaining, raise a garden. And that was not what I wanted to hear, because I didn't like to weed and I didn't like to spend time irrigating, and I told Charlotte, you know, if I can buy a bushel of corn for $10, and I can get a whole bunch of radishes for a dime, I don't want to go out there and be raising those things and pulling weeds and worrying about whether they get irrigated properly or not. And she says, no, Jack, you need to do what the prophet says. People are going to watch you, and you need to be an example. Not just the bishop, you need to be a good example to your membership. And I say, honey, I don't have time to raise a garden. She says, now, Jack, the prophet has asked us to have gardens, and I could see me out there in the mud and the cockleburrs or cleaning the weeds, and that just was not something I wanted to do. But I did. And so we had in our yard, we had a area where we'd had a gas tank. We had a 5,000 gallon gas tank that we buried in the ground so that we could buy gas wholesale. And the kids could come and use gas out of our own supply of gas, and it was our part of our food storage and our self-preservation. And that's where we had the garden, spot also with the gas pump just inside of the area. And so I'd be out there on a Saturday pulling weeds, and members of my ward would be going by and they'd see me over there, and that made Charlotte really happy that I was not liking what I was doing, but that I was doing what I was supposed to do. Well, so the first year we put a barbed wire fence around the area that included the gas pump and the garden. And Daniel left the gate open into the gas pump. He didn't close the gate, and the horses got in and ate all the garden before we got, I mean, just as the corn was coming on. and we got a few peas out of it, and I don't know, maybe some carrots or something, but the whole garden was gone because the horses ate it all. I said, see, Charlotte, this is no good at all. And she says, you're doing what the prophet asked you to do. And that's what you should do. And I said, look how it turned out. Well, the next year she insisted again, and so I spent $1,000 on a fence, chain link fence all the way around it. It had a gate so that the kids could get to the gas pump. Well, the gate was left open again, and the horses got in and ate all the garden. Second year, I'd spent $1,000 to protect it, and all that time out there, being an example, and it all was destroyed. One more year comes along, and I'm through with that pretty much. But we had a garden. I get a call from Charlotte. I'm at the office. She says, you better get home right now. I mean right now. And I said, what's the matter? And she hung up on me. And I thought, oh my golly, is the house on fire? What's going on? You know, and I hurried home. And I meet her as I pull in the driveway. And she says, how do you load this gun? She had a 30-06 rifle, and she was trying to get a 410 shell in it. And a 410 shell is it's a BB gun. I mean, it's full of BBs. A 410 shell is like a 12 gauge or a 16 gauge. And this 12, she couldn't get the shell in there. It wouldn't fit, but it was about the same size. And she says, how do you load this gun? And I says, what's the matter? She says, I'm going to kill those horses. They got in our garden again. She was mad at the horses. Anyway, that's our experiences raising gardens, doing what the prophet asked us to do. It didn't turn out very good for us, but at least we did what we were asked to do. So that's kind of an interesting little story that happened.
Did you ever have a year where you yielded and had some joy out there?
Yeah, we got some. We got carrots, you know, and a few potatoes and squash. They grow, you know, and yeah, we got some, but not anywhere near the yield that most people did, where they didn't have those kind of problems. And they didn't spend that much money. They just didn't have their horses over there in the same yard area that the garden was. Anyway, so that's one that probably I need to repent of and did what the prophet asked us to do. Charlotte came from a humble background. She was born in Mexico on a dirt floor. She didn't have, her father was a rancher, and down below the border, her grandpa had been Alexander F. McDonald, who was one of the prominent leaders of the church in those years.
Can I stop you for a second? Can you start this one more time and look at the camera?
Okay.
You keep looking down, and you have to remember these are people.
Okay.
You know, they're going to be looking right at you, and you wanna look at them. So
Okay.
start that story about Charlotte one more time.
Charlotte was a unique, wonderful lady that kept me on the right track and helped me do the right thing. And she came from real humble circumstances. Her grandfather, Alexander F. McDonald, was a polygamist, and when the church came out and said we need to be obedient to U.S. laws, and polygamy is against the law, then a lot of those polygamous families had to take their families to Mexico or to Canada in order to keep their families together, because they were illegally living in polygamy, and that had become against the law of the land. So her grandfather had taken his family to Mexico, and so she was born in Mexico of American family, but was a Mexican citizen because she was born in Mexico. And they were born on a ranch, Santo Domingo Ranch, out down in central or northern part of Mexico, and along with some other LDS families, they raised cattle and fruit and farmed and so on. But back in the days of Pancho Villa, who was a great Mexican revolutionary, these Mormon families got a contract with Pershing's army, the U.S. Army, and they were to deliver cattle to the border of the United States, which was the Texas, the Rio Grande border, and they had to take the cattle to the United States and deliver them in order to get paid by the army, by Pershing's army. And in the process, there was a few families, and I don't know how many, 6 or 8 or 10 families, that put their cattle herds all together and had a big cattle drive to the United States to deliver these cattle. And that was going to mean a lot of money to them, because this was their source of income, was their cattle. But Pancho Villa was a revolutionary in Mexico, and he was kind of a Robin Hood guy that stole from the rich and gave to the poor, and he was very popular. Well, he and his bandidos saw this Mormon group of cattle owners driving this large herd of cattle, and they went in and confiscated all their cattle. And in the process, it broke these families, because this was their life savings and their opportunity to enjoy some of their wealth that they had accumulated, and here it's all gone now to this revolutionary. Well, Charlotte's family was part of that, and they ended up coming out of Mexico with only a $20 gold piece that her mother hid in her shoe, and they lost everything. And when he was 55 years of age, he started over again with nothing. So that's the kind of family that Charlotte came from. She didn't expect a lot. She didn't. She was not a high maintenance gal by any means. She was humble and sweet and beautiful, and all those things that I thought, at least, was what I wanted as a wife. But someday we'll talk about that story. But she wasn't really someone that expected a lot. But when we started to get a little more prosperous as time went along, she started to enjoy some of the finer things of life, and she loved to travel, and she was so well read, so uh, smart, and knew about people's style of lives and all around the world. Wherever she could read up and go, she wanted to go. And I could see that this is going to be a little bit of problem for me to keep her in the air and going to all these places because it was costly. And she and I took a trip right when we moved to Logan. We went to Hawaii. This was our first trip, and we probably, at that time, maybe had been married 5 years or something like that. And we had this second honeymoon to Hawaii. And so when we came back, the travel agency that had sent us didn't even say anything about how was your trip or anything, and she was, and we were a little bit surprised that they didn't congratulate us on the trip, or they didn't send us any flowers, or I don't know what we thought we should have. But I remember Charlotte saying, you know, why don't we start a travel agency? Because we could do better than they did for us. And I thought, dang, in those days, travel agents could fly wherever they wanted to free. The airlines gave them free passes. And the resorts and places you would go that were opening up around the world would give you free passes if you would come and do what they called a fam trip, a familiarization trip, and come and see their resort so that you would bring luxury travel people back to see their places. So I thought, you know, that's a good idea. So in this room, in this office, we formed the Travel Chalet. And we didn't know anything about the travel business, but we knew we could treat clients better than we thought we'd been treated. And we knew that would work. And so I was able to find out about a fellow by the name of Dave. Well, I'll think of it in a minute. I hired. He was an agent up in Pocatello, and I'd heard about him, and so I called up and got a hold of him, and I said, "Would you be interested in coming and helping us form a travel agency?" And he said, his name was Dave Koyman, and he said, "Well, yeah, what are you offering?" I says, I want you to run our travel agency because we want to start a travel agency." And he says, "Well, that sounds like a good experience." And I ended up giving him half of it just as a bonus because he's the one that built it and so on and so forth. Anyway, it worked out really good. And Charlotte just ate it up because she could go on these fam trips all over the world and didn't cost her anything. And she'd take her friends, or she'd take me if I had time to go, but I didn't never seem to go very much. But she'd take one of the kids, or she'd take a neighbor, or she would take whoever wanted to go with her. And she traveled the world. Oh, and we had that for 27 years. That travel agency turned into a very profitable side job, business for us. We had a great experience. I remember when the Aggies played football in Japan, and Dave and I talked about how we could maybe get that trip and take all of the football players and all their families and everybody that wanted them to go watch them go to Japan and play football, and we went after it. And I happened to know the athletic director, and so I called him and told him that we want to be the travel agency that services you on this trip. And And so it worked out, and we got that trip, and we made about $25,000. Now, there's a lot of money in those days. We made about $25,000 on that trip when it was all done. And my dad went, and my son Scott went he was just a 16-year-old kid or something we all pitched in and helped take care of this group of people. And when we got back and we made around $25,000, the athletic department was always begging for money, always wanting support. And I talked to Dave and I said, how would you feel if we just made a contribution to the athletic department of $25,000? Because we wouldn't have had that trip unless they'd given us that opportunity. And that'll get our foot into the doorway that we can start doing all the athletic travel of the wrestling teams and basketball teams. And pretty quick we were into the university. We were getting probably 50 to 75% of all the university travel. And Dave just built that business up to where we had a booming business. And then we merged about 6 different other travel agencies over a period of time until we had a very small interest in Morris Travel, which was the largest travel agency in the state of Utah at that time, and we were partners with them. So that became a great experience. All came because I did not want to try to pay for all the trips that Charlotte was going to take. And it turned into a wonderful experience for our family and for monetarily. Anyway, we then sold the other half of it to Dave later, and he took it and ran with it from that point on. But we had 27 years of wonderful time, and that started right here in this room, and we grew into a large business, and profitable business, and a good thing for our family and for a lot of people. And when we had the 90th anniversary, when you shot those pictures of those people came, one of the 10th or 12th one that came through there was a fellow by the name Michael Nielsen. And I hadn't seen Michael for a long time, and he was one of the people we hired that helped put the travel agency together. And then right behind him, a little ways behind him, was Dave Koyman, who we talked about, and he was the one that really put it on the map and made it work, and he ended up with the business, and we ended up with all the benefits. And so,
Can I just ask you really quick, what was the most fun and exciting trip you took your family on?
well, probably Disneyland. When we took the whole family, we took all our grandkids and kids and how many there were at that time. We did a Disney cruise, and Disney has a Disney ship that they put you on for a couple weeks, and that probably, as a family, that was probably the most exciting thing, because here's the Nixon family and all their little kids and grandkids and all that Disney puts on, and through the Caribbean for, I don't know, 10 days or 2 weeks or something like that. And that'd probably be the best trip that we had as a family whole. We traveled the whole world, every place, especially Charlotte. She'd been to Russia numerous times, and to China. We went to China before President Nixon opened up China for diplomatic relations. We got in to see how China was prior to any personal governmental relationship with the United States. And we had some interesting experiences there. And Charlotte was I don't know if she was in Russia or she was in England or she was in South America. Usually South America I'd go with her because we both speak Spanish, and I'd usually, but yeah, and people would say, well, when you're going on another trip, if you need somebody to go, I'd like to go with you. And she always had people who wanted to go with her. she could take them for nothing because she was the travel agent. And she took a kid. She took Trace a lot of times. He was one of the older ones, and he had some neat experiences in Egypt and in actually in Israel. And he's a historian, and he is very knowledgeable about world affairs and history. And he was involved in some neat experiences with his mother traveling. One time they were in. I might have been Paris or someplace, and they got put. Trace had my name, Ezra John Nixon III, and so mine is Ezra John Nixon Jr. So he could travel on my ownership card, Ezra John Nixon, and so there'd be Charlotte Nixon and Ezra John Nixon, but it wasn't me, it was Ezra John, her son, and he's usually long hair and a beard and kind of rough looking, but very tender-hearted, and he went to this swanky hotel. I mean, they were they were 5-star hotels usually that they would go to. And so here they are at the registration, and Charlotte steps up and says, "I'm Charlotte Nixon, and I'm the host of this group." And Trey stepped up and he says, "And I'm Ezra John Nixon," and which was my name, but they assumed that he was her spouse rather than her son. and Trey says, "We were kind of an odd-looking couple, really." And they put them in the bridal suite, thinking they were husband and wife. So they take them up to the bridal suite, and Charlotte walks in, and Trace walks in, and there's a big heart bed over it, a big heart hot tub over in the corner, and a big canopy on the bed, with netting and so on. And Trace says, "Mom, I think we're in a bridal suite." And Charlotte says, "Oh, yes. Oh, we'll have to go change it." And Trace says, "No, Mom, I've never been in a bridal suite before." He says, "I like this." And a knock comes on the door about that time, Trace says, and they open the door, and here's these people all dressed in white, and they have this cart of all these hors d'oeuvres. Big bottle of shampoo and paint in the center. And Trey says, "Come on in." And so they come in with this tray of hors d'oeuvres and sweets and all. And Charlotte's embarrassed to death because it's not a bridal to them. She's not the bride, she's the mom. Anyway, Trey says, "Just don't say anything about it. I like this." So they got along fun. They had a lot of fun experience. And anyway, Trace is a very well-read person. They were on a trip one time down the Nile in Egypt, and it was a BYU tour. And as you know, Trace doesn't dress. He's pretty casual, very casual, and so he's going along kind of out of class with all these BYU tourists that are going on this BYU tour. And he's sitting kind of in the back, and they had periodic lectures on the different places there along the Nile where the kings reigned, and these pyramids belonged to this reign of kings and queens and so on. And the professor who was conducting the tour, so those that wanted to listen would lecture to them about this is what happened in this period of time, and this is what happened in this period of time. And somebody asked a question and said, well, what do you mean about this? And the professor said, you know, that's a good question. I'm not quite sure about how to answer that, because I'm not sure that I know for sure. And here's Trace on the back row, who people thought, who is this odd duck that's with our group? He just raised his hand, and Trace says, I think if you would look in the autobiography or whatever he quoted where to look, and he says, you'll find the answer to that, sir. And everybody turned around. Who's this guy that doesn't fit here and he knows the answers? And then he and the professor then became really good friends, and the professor deferred to Trace on a lot of the historical things that people wanted to talk about, and he became kind of the king of Siam there for a while, because everybody would refer to Trace as knowledgeable and so on and so forth. Those are interesting things that a mother and a son did together that gave them experiences that they would never have had if we hadn't had that travel agency. So